problem with that is that they waste a lot of money. So what I wanted to do was figure out about how much it costs to run those TVs for a year. So what I have to do to figure that out is figure out how many kilowatt hours electricity, and some of you I know don't pay the electric bill, so this is going to be a little bit of an education. Electricity is charged in kilowatt hours. You pay so many cents per kilowatt hour for the distribution and the generation, the two different parts of your electric bill. So we need to figure out kilowatt hours times the cost per kilowatt hour. So the first thing we need is hours on, because that's the hours part of kilowatt hours. So they're on 24 hours each day, 365 days per year, and we want to figure it out for 1 year. So doing that, we get 8760 hours. So that's how many hours they're on. There's 4 panels, so I'm just throwing a 4 out in front. I'm going to estimate they run at 150 watts. And that's based on, so the way I picked that number out is I know how much electricity my fridge uses, because I was very careful about that when I bought the fridge. I know how much electricity a light bulb uses, and I know there's several sort of electrical pieces inside of the TV, so I sort of guesstimated based on how much a light bulb uses, basically. So I said about 150 watts, and there's 1,000 watts in 1 kilowatt. And the way we get their kilowatt hours is we times by the number of hours that we use. So if I times all of this out, I get 5256 kilowatt hours. And last up, we have to do our final calculation. Our kilowatt hours times our cost per kilowatt hour. So our 5256 kilowatt hours. And for my electricity, between generation and transmission, it's about 10 cents per kilowatt hour, which makes this calculation a little bit easier to do. So it would be about $526 a year to run that set of 4 TVs. That doesn't include any of the extra bits, like all of those TVs are hooked to a computer. They have a sound bar. They have a whole bunch of different things, and I didn't include any of that in there. It was just the 4 TVs, assuming that they were standard LCD TVs. Okay, and last up, estimate the amount of money that students at HCC spent on books this semester. So, to do this, let's start at the end. So the last thing we're going to need to do is times the number of books by the cost per book. And you can see I was making, so in the last problem, I made one of my assumptions in the middle of my calculation there. Sometimes that's the way I work. I don't necessarily, like in the first one, I listed out my assumptions sort of clearly right away. If you're doing some of these problems, you're not going to know what you have to assume at the beginning. You might have to pop it through at the end and say, okay, well, or not at the end, but in the middle of the problem, say, okay, now I need to know what this value here is. So this isn't something I can ask you guys to do because you have no idea how many students attend HCC. So, oops, wrong device. Okay, at HCC we have about, I'm approximating here, 3,000 FTEs, which are full-time equivalents. So they add up all the credits that everyone takes and divides by 12 or 15, I'm not sure which, to see how many full-time equivalent students we have. So ours are 15. I'm also going to use the number of classes per student because the average number, to be a full-time student, you have to take somewhere between 4 and 5 classes. I'm going to say that the average is 4.5. And so what that gets me, if I multiply these two guys together, $3,000 times 4.5 Okay, that gets me a weird number. Well, 13,500 isn't a particularly strange number on its own. But that's how many classes are being taken, if that makes any sense. So if you're thinking about this, like, if Joe is a student and Joe takes 4 classes, those 4 classes are a number on this list. Bill might be a person. That's Joe, this is Bill. He might take a couple of classes that are common to Joe, but he might take 3 that aren't. So all of Bill's classes get counted too, including the overlap that happens with Joe's. So this is sort of like if you add up all the students in all the classes, this is the number that you would get out of it. The reason that I need that is because I need to figure out all the students in all the classes, how many books are going to be sold, because each student theoretically is buying a book. The one thing we have to make an assumption about is the percent of classes needing books. I went on the high end and said 75%. So my next step would be 75% of our 13,500. Which came out to 10,125. Okay, and that's part of our calculation. Number of books would be 10,125. And then cost per book, this is the tough one. I had background information on the number of FTEs, so I could fudge that a little bit. I know that full-time means somewhere between 4 and 5 classes, so we average that and get 4.5. The 75% needing books, that I have a little information on because I can see the orders for my department. So I know, like, my classes generally don't need books, but all the other classes do. So there's that. But the cost per book is really iffy. I'm going to lowball it here and say $100 per book. And if I do that, I'm going to have 1012500. So just over $1 million would be spent by students at HCC buying textbooks. Now, one thing that we didn't include in this estimate is that there are some people that just don't buy their textbooks. And I guess to accommodate for that, we could have lowered this guy a little bit. Because I'm a teacher. I know what goes on. Sometimes you just don't get the book. And that happens. So we could have lowered the percent of classes needing books to sort of accommodate for that, or added a second step in where you multiply by a different percentage, where you say, okay, 75% of classes need books, and then 75% of students in those classes actually buy the books. But this is sort of the whole gist of estimation. You're trying to figure out a little bit of information. You're not ever going to get an exact answer, but you're going to do your best and try to get in the ballpark. Going back to our football example, you're trying to get in the ballpark. You're trying to sort of answer your own curiosity, kind of, when you're doing these. You're saying, oh, how much would that cost? Well, let me figure it out. You're not ever going to figure it out for real, but you'll be able to get an idea as to what it is, so as to satisfy that curiosity.